What is good, everybody? My name is Alckemy and welcome to the channel. Today we are going to be taking a brand new look at Faceplant and looking at what all it has to offer. Now, in my humble opinion of, I don't know, almost 10 years of producing, I think that this is the best synth that you can currently get on the market. Is it cheap? Well, no, but you can use my discount code in the links below in order to grab this, or you can use the relatively affordable subscription model, which is somewhat pay to own. That being said, this is so cool and so amazing because it is a semi-modular synthesizer that allows from wavetable to FM to analog. It's got some great Unison engines. It also has a built-in sampler. It's got so many things, but the real beauty of this is that, for one, it's got unlimited effects. It has relatively unlimited generators and modulators, and you can just stack effects and stack effects and stack effects and stack effects in which to get amazing things. If you haven't seen it already, I've got plenty of tutorials on how to make insane neurobasses and stuff. I've also got preset packs that have really amazing sounds, kind of like something like this, to where you have, you know, a super simple bass that might sound something kind of like this. And then you change it into a neurorizer. And then if you turn the generator on, now, to my knowledge, I don't know of any other synth that can do this as well, except for Bitwig. And as you can see, I'm using Bitwig. So the cool thing about this stuff is that once you understand this particular workflow, you're going to start changing the way that you think about approaching a lot of different aspects of sound design. And that's one of the big things that I wanted to discuss with you all about why this is such an amazing tool, apart from it being super powerful. Now, it's very easy for you to just click on a generator, go, oh, look, now I have a saw wave, and then go here and look at all these effects that you have in order to be able to use. And so if you're just opening this up and you don't know where to go, it already has everything stepped out for you to where you can see that there's this little shadow here of like, oh, there's a new generator. Oh, I want to modulate it. Oh, LFO, great. How do I go from there? This little orange button right here comes over there and you can go, oh, I want to add that to the sync. And now the modulator system, whenever you hit a note, is very fast and very efficient. But let me back up because I know that I wanted to discuss kind of the ins and outs with this with you. And this video is going to be relatively unedited because I kind of just wanted a candid explanation about how all this stuff works. But if you're brand new to the channel, be sure to like and subscribe. I know I'm terrible. And make sure that you guys stay tuned because I have tons and tons of neuro-based videos and complex videos on this stuff. That's exactly why I'm doing something that is more so for the beginner audience. That's not to say that you might not learn something. So right off the bat, if you were to start from a brand new patch, you're going to be laid out with everything that's already labeled for you. Generators are over here on the left, and those feed into the lanes here that are in serial. And what that means is that lane 1 goes to lane 2, goes to lane 3. And you can change that here by sending this to either lane 3 or the master, so that way you can run those in parallel. And that means both of them are playing at the same time as opposed to one feeding into the other. Think of it like segments versus two segments playing at the same time. Now with this, if we want to get sound to come out of it, you just click and you can go into generators. All of these over here on the left create noise, some kind of sound rather. These are two effects that you can use, and then with these groups over here, you can use that to kind of create different, I guess, like racks and auxiliary stuffs and mixing and output. So generally speaking, if you have a group or so and this little red guy comes up, that means that nothing is going out, so you have to put something in there. I just held command to click on this. You don't have to do that. You can just click an analog or whatever and then drag it up. Makes it really easy. If you hold option and click, it creates a duplicate of it, and it's pretty straightforward from there. Now, I'm not going to break down all this stuff for you because this is something that is a completely different aspect of sound design. It's more so of, hey, look at all the features that this has to offer. So you can choose your wavetables here. It's got sync, and then if you have a square wave, you can choose the pulse width in case if you want to make it thin or large. The Unison thing over here is awesome because it's got a bunch of different Unison modes here to choose from. I usually go with either smooth or synthetic, but let's say you want to play a chord with this out of a single thing. This will Unison stack this in fifths. It's great. You can detune it, you can spread it out if you want, and then the blend is obviously kind of how much you want to blend it. So if you want to start from like everything being stacked on top of itself, then work it out, then that's a great thing to do. And then obviously you can change the balance of it to be focused on the DC offset, right? So pushing that up, you can see how it kind of moves that either up or down. So that's pretty much how you get sound to come out of it right off the bat. Now, one thing that I will say is you definitely want to look at all of the other different generators this has to offer. For example, the wavetable has an amazingly powerful engine here. There's a bunch to choose from just by clicking on the default wavetable button respectively, and you can find your folder. I've got a bunch of wavetables, a bunch of different stuff that you can use. And obviously it's very quiet and very simple. Surely I have more cool wavetables than that. Something kind of like this, and making a awesome kind of bass from this is very easy. Now within this you have all the same controls as the Unison, but something that you might be interested in doing before you even get to the effects is adding some kind of distortion to it. So you just bring one of these up and then you can choose from the different distortion units and find one that works for you. I typically like saturate on the very base one, and that gives it some nice chunk. Now, for whatever reason, let's say you want to add another oscillator to this and make it, either like a dedicated sub or whatever. One thing that you can do is you can place something on the outside of this because the chain goes downward. So this actual sine wave will be clean. You can add a little bit of sub to that. Or something else you can do, which is what makes this important, is grabbing a new group and kind of just quickly recreating the same output of group, generator, and then an output. And you can tell it what lane you want to go to from here as the same thing as over here. Now at the bottom of these you have an envelope. You can also create a separate envelope if you want to control something specific, and this will get you into modulation, which we will discuss more. But let's say I just wanted to modulate maybe the sync of this or something just to make it cool. You'll see that this will follow the sync here. Now with that, this is pretty much unlimited, and you can do this with an envelope, you can do it with a randomizer, which is my favorite, LFO, note pressure velocity, maximum, minimum, and multiply, which is kind of just like creating like a range between something that's different than 0 to 100. That's pretty much all you need to know about that, or it's going to like stack it and so. But in any case, whenever you're talking about modulators and stuff, you kind of just use the orange buttons to send it through. Likewise, let's say we wanted to use this sub, or the sine wave rather, to FM something here. We can go and add it to the phase, to the shift, to the pitch, or to the volume or amplitude, which would be amplitude modulation or ring mod. Now I do say FM, it's actually more considered to be pulse or phase modulation, sorry, as you can see, but it's not really that big of a difference. It kind of gives you the same thing. And that sounds all nice and dandy, and maybe what we want to do as well is change the frame while this moves through. Great. Now, one thing that you will notice, and I kind of want to talk about this right now because it is kind of like a phase plant hack, is that there will be a point that you will run out of modules. I'm not sure if it's 10 or 16, I don't remember, but if for whatever reason you run out, so let's say you like just map this to too many things and then you have none, what you can do is you can actually map this rather to the amount of the macro here. So whatever this will do, let's say like I've got one of these, it doesn't really matter. Let's just kind of stack this until we run out, and that way we can find out together. Again, don't worry about what I'm actually doing. This is more for demonstration's sake. So we can obviously map this from the same modulator to however many stuff you want. And you can also make this bipolar, just since we're talking about modulation and stuff. But 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So with that modulator, if for whatever reason you run out and you want this to control more, then what you do is you map this to a macro. Now, whenever this plays, this is going to change the macro. And then all you have to do is just keep adding stuff to this, and you'll see that it will follow along the same deal. Pretty neat, right? And you can do this with just about anything. If you feel like for whatever reason you're running out of macros or something of that sort, you can always kind of like map a map to something. Unfortunately, with Faceplant version 1.827, which is what I'm on, before Faceplant 2.0 hits, you don't have the ability to mod remap quite yet, but it is coming. It is a feature that's coming out. But just know that just for, showing you how much you can do with a single modulator, there's a lot of stuff to be had there. So let's go ahead and reset all of this. You can double click here to get rid of a mod, and let's talk about some other stuff that will help you. Let's say you've got this sound and you've got this sound, and they're in two different groups, but you want to take the sum of whatever this is, or rather the output, and change it to a new generator. Well, all you have to do is go and click on the auxiliary, and what this is going to do is say route to aux module using modulation system. And that's really confusing, but all you have to do is take the output of this one and grab it here, and you will see the entire wavetable. And this means that you can take this essentially and keep resampling or make it a variation of it. And it works really well when you're talking about detuning or something, or you can invert the phase or whatever. And it's super fun to kind of mess around with that. Unfortunately, there aren't really any pitch controls with this, but at the same time, whatever this goes through, this is going to become, and then you can either add different kinds of distortion to it or different kinds of filtering, and you've pretty much created a duplicate of this whole entire segment. Within that, there's some other stuff that you can do like mixing or whatever, and I don't really worry about that too much because you can just use the level. So like, let's say, you've got some sub on this and this is too loud. You can go here and either do it that way, or let's say you've got this up here and you kind of just want to focus on the mix of this in this way. Then you can say, this is too loud. I'm going to bring this back down and then leave the sub alone. So I don't really see myself using that a whole lot, but it does exist in case if you have a different means of organization. So now that you understand all of that stuff, you have to make sure that you have an output in order for this to make sound. And whenever you start brand new, there is always an output generated. Just know that if you create a new group, then you have to create an output. You have to create an output as well. One thing that you can do, however, is you can create separate outputs within the same group. So you can say, all right, well, I want this analog to output to this one. That's going to go to lane 1. I can create a second output here that can stack, or I can send it to lane 2. So now there's going to be a signal that goes here, and there's going to be a signal that goes here. And you can see that the routing options are pretty dense. Now, that's kind of if you already know how to do some sound design stuff, but for the sake of all that, if none of that made sense to you, then let's go back to the beginning here and talk about how to make something very easy. So kind of like what I talked about before, I'm going to add some unison to this and change the voices to 2. Turn the detune up, and we've got ourselves a respace. Yay! The next thing that we can do is add just a little bit of distortion here, and I'm going to set this to saturate, so we've got ourselves a nice cool little respace that's giving us some really cool phase oscillation. Once we get into this section here, we've got all these effects to choose from, and there is a gigantic list in which to go through, and unfortunately I'm not going to go through that, but what we can do is grab something either like a filter here and maybe take out the low mids. We can also change this to a low pass if we want to make it more of like a subby thing. Or what we can also do is come down here to a modulator and grab an LFO to move this over here. And now you can see this opens and closes. This is set to a Hertz value, which means that it's in free mode. So it's always going to move at this speed, which is independent of the BPM, but you can hit sync. And now for every 4th note on 85 BPM, you can see that this is going to kind of repeat on itself. You can set retrigger on, or you can set this as an envelope. And you can also shift the phase. For whatever reason, you can also set the polarity of this, as I discussed before, of unipolar. So maybe this only wants to go up. That means that it's going to go all the way to 0 value of 0 crossings and then go back up. Whereas for this, it's going to go both up and down if it's in bipolar mode. This is great. But if you want to change this, you are greeted with the grid. It's a little bit wonky compared to something like Serum, but instead of double clicking anywhere, as you see that doesn't work, just click on the line and then drag it and then go here. You can hold shift if you want to move the curve. Sorry, I meant option. Or you can create multiple, pretty much as many shapes as you want to kind of divide that. You can also change the grid layout of how many steps it has. And you can also click this if you want it to be magnetic. So you can see that this is moving kind of together and snapping rather than being kind of like free mode, I guess. I almost always keep this off. You can also create curves here if you want. So you can do like a free draw thing, which is pretty neat, or you can do step mode. And this is great for creating arpeggiators. We'll talk more about that another video. Or actually, I've got some other videos on that stuff, but just know that it exists. That's really fast because of how many movements we have in between that. So it might be wise to turn this up and turn this down and just kind of slow that down to 6/4 now. You can see that's moving a lot slower. So with that, you've got a bunch of different options to choose from as well. You can create one-shots, you can create wubs, you can create your own tables and stuff that do different stuff. This is particularly a different kind of stepper that you have, and you again can assign this to just a bunch of different stuff. Now let's say you have something that you want to move on and off. Well, what we can do is grab this here and go into the classic and go into a sine wave. And now I want to modulate how much this modulates. I can go here and click on the yellow button and go to the plus. And now from a value of 0 to 100, whenever this hits 0, it's not going to modulate anymore. Whenever it goes back up, it's going to go on the full amount. Likewise, within that instead, maybe if I want to have this as a toggle for on and off controls, I can hit the plus button. And now whenever this is off, you can see that it's not moving. Whenever I turn it on, it activates the LFO. This is an amazing, amazing tool for macros. The ability to turn on these LFOs on and off is basically controlling movement. And the most amazing thing about controlling the movement in that aspect is being able to take something that's very simple and turn something on and let it go crazy and then turn it back off. And you can do that while controlling everything in time. That alone, within, let's say, the first patch that I showed you with all the crazy racks and stuff, is the premise about how you get amazing things. Outside of that, it's just you stack a bunch of things on top of each other that kind of move over and over. And I would encourage you to really just like slap everything on together, maybe 2 effects at a time, and be like, okay, well, what does this sound like with this? What does this sound like with this? Oh, what does this button do? Dexter's Laboratory, right? And within that, you're going to teach yourself a whole lot about sound design as opposed to looking up how-to tutorials, maybe like this one, but please finish the video because I've got more to discuss. So within that, the other thing that we need to talk about is the major monster powerhouses, which are multipass and snap heat. Now, when you pull these up, you're not really going to know what they do, but you have to open them via the little pencil tool here, and suddenly you're greeted with an effect rack that's completely empty. Multipass on one end controls a frequency split effect rack. And what that means is that you can see here that you've got band 1 to 5, only these 3 are on, but everything within this frequency range on this side, you can apply effects to. Everything within this middle region right here, you can apply effects to. And then everything with the effect aspect here is going to have that. And you've got effects before, and you've got effects after. Now, one trick that I'm going to show you, just for the sake of making your life easier, is that there's no master mix. So what you need to do is grab the mix on all of these and turn them down. Grab a macro, pull the mix up all the way. And what this is going to do is it's going to allow you to turn the entire effect rack on or off. So now that you have this, you can set this, like rename it to mix or so. I know this is small windows, so forgive me. But now that I have something like this, if I want to turn everything off or on, look, I can do that. And now that we've created a macro on the outside here, I can assign an LFO to it. Yay, look at that. And now that I have this as well, if I want, I can also control this and remap it here. So now whenever I turn that macro on, it's going to activate the LFO on the other stuff and on the entire effect rack. That's not all though. And this also applies to snap heat. You've got 2 built-in effects or modulators here that can either do basic shapes or randomization, whether it be stepper or curved. But that's kind of what you want to be mindful of for, let's say you want to build something that's completely independent of phase plant. You can do everything within the box here. It kind of works in the same way where you can grab, something like this and then move that up, move that down. Doesn't really matter. Cool filtering. Smile. Okay, sorry. But within that, you can, pretty much do all the same controls that you have except for a multi-stage envelope. But if you want to control something with a multi-stage envelope, you can do it with phase plant. What you have to do is create a macro here, grab what you want to modulate with the multi-stage envelope, and you see that it's created a macro. Now you just apply the outside modulator to that overall macro. So that's how you get stuff to work outside with phase plant and in multipass as well. In saying that, I definitely encourage you to build insane, just throw anything on here and have fun. Maybe one tip is that if you're working with bass, put your low end in mono, everything below like 140, 200. I don't know, play around, have fun. This will keep your sub in mono. You can keep it clean and essentially not touch it. And that will be helping you on your way to like making a usable bass if you want to keep the sub within. That's a guide. That's not a rule. It's not, a thing that you have to do. Just kind of keep that in mind. So the other thing that's really interesting within both multipass and snap heap though is that you can actually use the envelope as an envelope follower. And what's really interesting about this is whenever you hear audio being triggered, this will actually activate this. And so where this can be useful is, let's say you've got something like a slice EQ, and we're just going to use the gain for this. Or oh, sorry, let's create an actual thing first. Maybe like this, where you can see that it's up. You can grab this here and pull the gain down. So that way, whenever this audio is triggered, let me go ahead and turn the filter up. And let's go back here. You can see that the gain is being pulled off. Let's go ahead and make this a little bit more dramatic so that way you'll see the movement. You can see that this ADSR is actually being affected by the peak mode here. Now, if you switch it to ADSR, it's going to follow these, as you can see. But for me, I actually like to use this as an envelope follower, which means that it's triggered by sound rather than an actual just like curve. And this is great for doing dynamic EQ, for doing interesting filtering, for all kinds of stuff. And I encourage you to hop in and give it a shot. You can also do this via the pitch. It works pretty well. It's not always perfect, unless if you have something that's very clear on the pitch. And then you can also have this triggered by MIDI, where you set the note to something specific of, if I play a higher note, it's going to move down. So if I play a higher note in this way, or a lower note rather, maybe I can set this one to here. Sorry, let's zoom out and then move this up and this way. You can see that that little guy is being affected by the pitch now. Now, obviously it's going to be up to you to figure out how to make all this stuff work together, but just the sheer fact of having this amount of control is what makes this insane. And of course, if you need a break from sound design, just play a quick game of Snake. It's totally cool. You can use the arrows and have yourself a nice little time of being like, man, I need a break from all these preset packs that I just released on alckemy.com. Oh, game over. I'm terrible at this game. In any case, this works almost in the exact same way as it does for Snap Heap, except that Snap Heap is pretty much just a series and parallel chain. So it's independent of frequency. It's like more of these guys over here. It's just more lanes, so to speak. However, if you want to change this into parallel, then you would use this little guy right here and activate the next one. So instead of using maybe a filter like this, where you will hear that if it's in serial and this is being filtered, you'll hear that it's pretty much blocking everything and the high frequencies. But maybe you want to separate this into a different way, or you want to just have a separate sub and then do other kinds of effects, maybe to the entire signal like a chorus or so. Well, you can hit this, and now these two are playing independent of each other. Or I guess alongside of each other, as opposed to the filter going into the chorus. And that's really the only difference between these two, except for the fact that I guess they don't have that anymore. We used to have Space Invaders, but now we don't. In any case, that's pretty much how that works. And you can mute them or solo them or whatever and adjust them with the same mix. Again, I would recommend doing the whole thing with a macro where you pull the mix on, so that way you have a master control and then set that as your default preset. That way you can kind of have this being like a super rack that you can just kind of turn on and off in that sense. So with that, the last thing that I'm going to talk about is probably the most intricate, and I'm not going to be going like super far into this, but we definitely want to talk about the wavetables. And this offers a huge amount of control and like flexibility when it comes to this. It's just a little bit confusing. So when it comes to creating wavetables, it's actually incredibly easy. You can click on these three right here and also these over here to help shape it. But let's just say I want to make a wavetable like this. Well, you can draw it via curves, kind of like that. Although I find that for me, this is somewhat intuitive. The cool thing about this though, is that it helps you create dedicated lines that help build specific harmonics. Whereas with this one, it's kind of like a free draw, and this is what I usually end up doing, of just being like, great. Now, whenever you see this up here, this is our morpher. And if you were to click right here, that means that from this region to this region, it's going to morph. And what's cool about this is if you keep clicking on these and then you redraw this, you can create different variations of the wavetable to make it more complex, as you can see. However, if you highlight this, kind of like that above, where you grab the bar instead of doing it with this little keyframe here, then it's going to keep that pretty solid. And sometimes that's not really what we want. You see how that's not morphing at all? So we actually messed up. Instead, what you want to do is grab this, set it to what you want, then grab a keyframe here and make that morph. And now you can see that there's a different crossfade, which looks really cool in real time between all of these. And that works really well. Within these, you can also create different shapers or move stuff off sync or kind of do stuff in a more traditional way in that sense, but I typically don't use it a whole lot, just know that this exists. And the other thing that you can do is either draw in individual harmonics like that, and you'll see how it changes the waveform. So if you're used to something like operator and you just want to make like your own waveforms in that way, then you can do that with an entire wavetable. So let's say you go there and then you do something kind of like that. Again, whenever you see this kind of morph and stuff, you'll see that it is all natural. You can also add filtering to this via the same filters that you use for the other things, to where, let's say we want to start this being closed, we create a keyframe here, and then we move the cutoff up. Whenever you see this move to the left, you'll see that it goes down. Pretty awesome, right? You can also apply effects if you want. There's a whole lot of stuff to get into. You can also do specific fixes. I almost never use this, but you can also undo, and then when you're ready to save your wavetable, you can do that just like that. And that's pretty much it for the wavetables. I do have a comprehensive guide to Neurobase 4 on the Arcana member channel deal. You can just click join and then watch the video and look at all the stuff that I have to offer. But as a basic breakdown, there's quite a bit to get into already, especially if you're new. Now, that being said, the last thing that we can talk about is the sampler. And I know I've kind of jumped around a bit, but the significant thing with this is that you can loop. Unfortunately, not yet. Anyways, there is no granular synthesis within this, but you can pull up anything from your library here. You can just go to add location if you have your own samples, and then you can kind of toggle them or switch them out or do whatever. And then you'll see that there are the same controls. On the bottom, you have your looping. So we've got infinite, sustain, ping pong, and reverse. And then you can also change the length when it starts, crossfade, and then you can also offset where it starts from. And this is incredibly fun, especially if you abuse this to put like maybe a randomized modulator on here or so, and kind of just change maybe the length of this, because it's going to do different stuff whenever you play. Now, it's a lot of fun to get into this kind of stuff, because as it moves and it re-triggers, you'll be finding yourself into a lot of other cool different things. But part of it is just kind of playing with it and finding something, or finding a region here that will kind of work, and then bouncing off. And it's definitely a lot of fun to throw a resampled respace into here and find something to work with in between. And in that sense, there is so much to jump into within this that you have available at your fingertips. And then of course you can apply all of the other things with your detuning, with, you know, your envelopes and all that. And then you can pretty much stack, I think it's like 36 engines onto this. And it's pretty CPU efficient, especially Faceplant just came out with the update of how it can support the M1 chip natively, which is something that I have. And look, almost no CPU on that. Now, granted, I've got a pretty beefy CPU. I do have an M1 Max, but in the sense, it's pretty efficient in that way. And there are a ton of things to get into with this that will definitely be enjoyable for you. So with that being said, the last thing I want to leave you with is throw a limiter on here, especially when you get into doing crazy experimental sound design and stuff. I know that I didn't really talk about this stuff down below, but it's kind of basic with your glide and global unison and all that. But this is just kind of a quick intro on how to get into using Faceplant and making a lot of really awesome things. The last thing that I will cover is that on one end you have latency of here, which if you're using delays or stuff, you're going to have latency. You can also create this here to where you have a virtual keyboard. There's your pitch wheel, and you know, in case if you don't have a keyboard or something, but you want to kind of audition a sound and hear how it sounds, you can do that. And then at the end, you've got your master fader. And within that stuff, you can, you know, there's a lot of things that you can do and read the manual or whatever. But in that saying, this is pretty much a basic intro towards how you can get some really amazing sounds without having to go too far within something like Faceplant. So thank you guys so much. Be sure to like and subscribe the video if you enjoyed this stuff, and let me know if you have any questions. And if you want to see what this stuff can do, then be sure to check out all the presets that I have to offer on my website. Thanks everybody. I will see you in the next one.